great to be here with you all this afternoon, and especially to have followed from so many outstanding speakers whose content I will not hesitate to refer back to, because I'm again talking about a particularly intriguing application of blockchain, which is in the personal digital identity space. So thinking about emerging technologies and harnessing them in the South African and African context, I think for me the most important aspect is as an equalizer to bridge that, of course, prevalent gap that we have in this region between the haves and the have-nots, and I think technology really does have the opportunity to begin to bridge that gap, and in particular blockchain, in particular applications in personal identity. So before getting onto that slide, I just wanted to run through, as given my background in quantum physics, some of the mathematical proofs around quantum blockchain. So I know I'm standing between you and coffee, but I think if we could take out a pen, no, I'm joking about that. But we will, in fact, get to space and quantum blockchain before the end of this talk. So I'm going to take a very broad perspective as a researcher and someone who, in fact, started thinking about applications of blockchain in the identity space after last year's workshop and meeting Sean Conway, the founder of Consent, and thinking about the excellent work that they and many others are doing. So for me, to begin with, I mean, where was data stored before humans emerged? Well, it still is, to a large extent, stored in DNA. So those are the blueprints and indeed the instructions in the lineage, and that contained all of life's data prior to the emergence of Homo sapiens, who have now started to store significant amounts of data of their own. So these humans, which we are, of course, part of that species, investigate reality, and it's our investigations of the small components of reality, like electrons, that have led to the emergence of the transistor, which has led to the emergence of the computer and commercialized personal computers. Our understanding of the particles of light, photons, have led us to be able to communicate, and an important development after transistors, computers, computer networks is the network of computer networks, namely the internet, where we have almost instant capabilities to communicate and send information around the globe. And I think, so that's the global communications network. So these ideas I'm throwing around now are what I see as the necessary precursors to the emergence of blockchain. So first we had the transistor, the computer, the network of networks, the internet. And next we had cryptography, because as we're loading devices and information and sending all of the wonderful, conveniences that come with modern day life of sending information around, the convenience of connectivity, of course, comes with an associated risk in terms of an adversary intercepting this data and using it for various purposes. So cryptography is a necessary development then in terms of making the data that we would send from individual to individual or entity to entity undecipherable, except for those in possession of a key. And of course, we've got symmetric key systems, which can only be hacked by brute force methods. AES is based on that. We have asymmetric key systems, public key systems like RSA, which are only thought to be very difficult to hack based on mathematical problems like factorization. So in my mind, those were the three kind of necessary areas of investigation that have eventually led to the emergence of blockchain, proposed immediately almost after the financial crash. Obviously, we had Bitcoin as the first digital currency. There are now thousands of different cryptocurrencies, and the market is at hundreds of billions, and that's blockchain. But what I will focus on now, and I don't need to go into detail after the great detail we've heard in previous talks, there are over 100 searchable projects and activities and companies in the space of blockchain for identity. And I think some numbers here that are worth mentioning are that 1.1 billion people worldwide, this is estimated by a World Bank study in 2017, cannot prove their identity. And we don't even know how many of the world's 200 plus million immigrants, 21.3 million refugees, or 10 million stateless persons have IDs. So while the notion of giving everyone a digital identity at birth may sound big brotherish, I think this is actually the only way in which we can provide an equal footing for all born humans to actually participate in the increasingly digital world. So that's one motivation for thinking about different technologies and how we can identify people with them. So in terms of the information that we're sending around on the internet, a large amount of it is personal information. Given that 25% of the world's population has logged into Facebook once a month during 2017, 90% of the internet data that's on the internet has been created since 2016. And a lot of this data is, blogs, theories, music, art, thoughts, photos, accounts of different activities, and basically a digital representation of what it is to be human. So far we have stored billions of terabytes, which sounded a better way to say it than zettabytes, which is 10 to the 21. That's the kind of total amount of data that we've so far sort of stored in various databases and sent around the world. Now that we're putting devices online with exuberance and IoT, wanting increased convenience by having our stuff accessible from the cloud, protecting this personal information is becoming a really crucial issue. And when we look at the numbers in terms of not the market, but the market for hacking, or the costs of having a security breach, this is going to be in the trillions in the next few years, according to certain studies. So we have, of course, in 2017, 30 million South African IDs were hacked, as well as the financial and other information leaked. 3 billion Yahoo accounts back in 2013-14. And the European Union is kind of leading the move globally towards trying to put legislation in place that will prevent different entities from somehow obtaining information with or without your permission and using it, or even worse, selling it, whereas this is your personal information. So I think while we can have lively debates over the level of encryption and security we need for copyright or transactional capabilities, smart contracting and all that, and the debates are certainly fascinating, I think when it comes to personal data, this is certainly a fundamental piece of data that we would need to secure and have correct legislation around more than anything else. And I think GDPR, being launched this year, applies to every country, in fact, and not just the European Union, because many people have dual citizenship. The government is not obliged to know that. So there are European residents sitting in this room, of course, and in various scenarios. So this is indeed a kind of global revolution in the data protection regulations around personal data. So I had attended a workshop with some members from Evening and Consent, who are stewards for the Sovereign network. And what Sovereign has claimed is that what the internet is really missing is this identity layer for humans. So of course, machines and devices are labeled with IP addresses and so on. But in terms of having the ownership and the control over personal data, and indeed even just a single identifier online, is something that we're actually missing for humans. And of course, blockchain, with its decentralized capabilities, has exactly these kind of capabilities that we'd be looking for in terms of being able to regulate how your personal data is controlled. And again, I won't go into detail on this, but for me, I found this example terrifying. Some people might find it lovely, and the point is that we should be able to choose between the two. So as you walk through a shopping mall or down a road, you receive notifications on your phone because maybe you bank with a certain health insurance company and they've got a discount for some kind of shoe at the shop next door. For me, terrifying. For others, wonderful. The point is we should be able to, from our device by which this information is being sent and transferred, choose and have visibility on the contractual agreements with which we choose to share this information, the duration of the period that we're happy to share it on, what that information can and can't be used for, which aspects of that information can and can't be used for what. Is it anonymized? Maybe we'd like to add our medical data onto a system that can assist in research for cancer. Maybe we'd insist on having this data anonymized before we would do that. And I think these are all amazing capabilities that are built into a blockchain-based personal identifier. And in my mind, I see the standardization procedures currently underway with a global network like Sovereign as somehow analogous to the initial standardization protocols behind the internet in the early phases. So in terms of SAP, so the Sovereign network is built underpinned by the Hyperledger project, governed by Linux, and SAP is a supporter of the Hyperledger project. So to move on to how we would then have this initial identifier. So if you're imagining at birth, perhaps in a hospital or in a medical facility, some kind of biometric data could immediately be affiliated with that individual and then carried through. So of course, there are various ways to do that, some of which we use already. I mean, how convenient to log into online banking with a fingerprint, retinal scans already in place in some sort of high security buildings. But at the end of the day, we're back to the DNA being, the most unique characterizer of a human. And I think when we think of having our entire sort of genome as on an individual level uploaded into some kind of system, then we would certainly insist on wanting to control this information, and certainly security here would be a huge concern. And this is just an aside that, by the way, these zettabytes of information that we've stored on the internet are less than 1% of the total information stored in a single human's genetics. So that's just an amazing fact. But on the points of whether or not you would indeed agree for your entire genetic sequence to be your identifier and which cloud provider you might choose to trust this information with, that leads me to the slide on quantum blockchain. And there's a Russian quantum research group who have reported additional layer of security onto a blockchain. So blockchain, and this is an important point to notice, by a quantum computer would be more easy to hack than RSA. So current sort of maximum secured RSA would need around 45,000 qubits, that's after error correction, in order to crack this system, which is based on factorization. So Shor's algorithm factors large numbers efficiently. And if we have a quantum computer, which is still kind of a holy grail in physics, you probably saw, or if you didn't, Google announced this week, a 72-qubit quantum computer. So we're way off from 4 to 5,000, and it's not currently clear whether this kind of 72-qubit model would be scalable to be this universal computer that could crack RSA. But on the other hand, elliptic curve cryptography is underpinning the security of blockchain, and you would require a quantum computer of just around 1,000 qubits to crack this system. So what this research group have done is to add an additional layer of security where they're using quantum key distribution for authentication in the blockchain protocol. So how does quantum key distribution work? Without going into detail, it basically is based on the fact that if you intercept a single photon, you cannot get any information out of it without disturbing it. And indeed, that's how quantum key distribution works, by sending single photons along a traditional fiber optic cable. These technologies have been around, quantum key distribution, since 2007, commercialized, stable, used by governments and banks. So I think this is a fascinating area of research and implementation to look towards in the future. And I was wondering if I'd be able to get through a whole presentation without mentioning space, and the answer is no. So I Googled blockchain and space, just for fun actually, and found out that QTIM has launched a satellite, which is now a node of blockchain launched from China on a Chinese satellite, which enables users to mine this token from their smartphones interacting with the satellite, and that was just this month. So that's blockchain and space, and the advantages of this of having this data store, this capability off of Earth, is that government regulations can be circumvented. So as we know, space legislation is not, it's a wide open field. I always encourage students who are thinking of going into law to think about going into space law, because as we expand off of Earth, which of course I'm invested in doing, we're going to need better legislation to dictate what exactly we're doing in that regime. So that wasn't actually me being launched to Mars by Elon Musk's successful launch of the Falcon Heavy. If you didn't see that, South African-born Elon Musk launched in the first attempt and re-landed the boosters, the Falcon Heavy, which has the capability to take humans to Mars. And this is actually also related to blockchain, because a question I get a lot, besides "Are you crazy?" is, what are you going to do with all of your money, not that I have much, when you leave Earth? Siblings and friends and so on are hoping that they're going to get a donation when I eventually shoot off. Of course, I'm going to invest in cryptocurrency, because what are the requirements? Connectivity, computational capability, and cryptography. And will we have these on Mars? Yes. Will we have them on planets beyond Mars? Yes. And another application is, of course, in the digital identity space. So whether or not your government is a reliable, trustworthy, central authority for your identification, once you leave Earth, of course, blockchain for personal digital identity is an ideal way to still maintain your capability to indeed transact with cryptocurrencies on the planet Mars. And that's all for me. Happy to answer a question if we have time.
We do have time for questions, I'm pleased to say. Anyone?
What is your opinion on mapping out biological relations to identities stored on the blockchain? I ask this because I think it could solve human trafficking problems. For instance, we have this relatively new law where you have to provide an unabridged birth certificate if you're moving minors in or out of South Africa. So I see that it would be a great way to prove that you're related to an individual on a blockchain. Do you foresee that as something that is possible?
So the first thing that popped into my mind is if we're using it for supply chain management, then surely we should also be using it to protect the human rights of the humans as they are, as children or even as adults, moved around against their will. So I would say yes. But on the other hand, then of course we need to get into with seriousness the application of using an additional layer of quantum security on this data. And I don't know if any of you have had your genome mapped by these various like $10 companies, but that to me is terrifying to think what they're actually doing with that data, and if more than one of your family, the information that they can really get from that analysis has a lot of power behind it. So I think, as we've heard so many speakers say, the regulatory discussions have to be ongoing. But indeed, if it's applicable for supply chain management, that's a great point I hadn't thought of. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question which is extremely relevant to this. Did you have to go into one of those 500-day capsule spaceship simulator things for training?
Not yet. So at the moment, we're still volunteers. So we're the 100 finalists from around the world, and we'll be narrowed down to 24. And those 24 will be lucky enough to get the full astronaut training, plus training for living on another planet, which is of course not part of the current astronaut training. So the fun is yet to begin. We're waiting for the next round to be announced, hopefully this year. And if you're interested in what kind of training astronauts do, including these isolation models, there's a TV show that just came out. I think it's called Astronaut's Toughest Job in the Universe, which really goes into detail about the flying of helicopters, the scuba diving, and all of the fun, which is yet to begin. So watch the space for updates on that any moment now.
Thanks.
Two quick questions.
Thanks very much for being inspired. Two quick questions. The first one is, when you come back, you can just let us know if the world is flat or not.
It's actually a one-way trip, so I can let you know as we're flying out.
And the second one is, how does quantum blockchain or the quantum coin or ICO be better than the others?
Well, so quantum key distribution is an application to distribute a one-time pad, which is the only known mathematically provably secure way of communicating. That's to encrypt the message with a random bit string of equal length to the message, to decrypt it with the same key. So what quantum key distribution does is enable you using entangled photon pairs. I'll try to keep this short. Using entangled photon pairs to distribute these two identical keys. So while not all of the blockchain protocol involves symmetric key distribution, the aspect of authentication of the users can be accompanied in using this add-on. And if you want more detail, it's published in the Physics Archive, or Science Direct had an article on it, and it's a full research paper. So for those who want to go into more detail, it's an additional layer on top of the usual protocol, basically. Yeah.
Still got time? Anyone wants to ask? Yes?
Thanks. Hi guys, I'm Carl. Thanks a lot for the talk, it was really interesting. I'm actually busy looking into interstellar cyber communication and security. What are some of the risks that we're going to be facing out there?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I've been told to be careful what I say in public, but I find that difficult. So when we're on Mars, let's say we discover life. Let's say we send that message back to Earth, and let's say someone intercepts it and decides that that's not the message that we want to send. So before I leave, I'm going to take massive amounts of one-time pads on like zettabytes of hard drives and leave corresponding one-time pads here on Earth. So that information will get through, and I think the one-time pad, again, is the only way to really do that provably securely, assuming that the two communicators were initially together, because of course it's difficult to send single photons over hundreds of millions of kilometers, although in the vacuum of space it's easier than doing it through the atmosphere of Earth. So as you know, probably China launched a quantum satellite late last year. So the satellite is able to emit entangled photon pairs. So the maximum distance of distribution on Earth, from obviously a few hundred kilometers up, is to send them to distances of 1,200 kilometers apart currently. So that's an impressive feat of science and a very interesting political development in terms of the power that you can wield, being the only country on the planet that can actually provably securely communicate in private. So I don't know if that you're probably thinking of. We can chat, I think. But I think the one-time pad is what we have to go to in terms of the only mathematically provably secure way of doing secure communication. And we've got the speed of light to worry about, of course, too. But I think that's a conversation we can have after.
If you had to run a full node on Mars, which blockchain would you choose?
Oh, we'd probably make a new platform called the Mars blockchain or something like that. Yeah, we've got plenty of people doing computer science and coding amongst the 100, so I'm sure we'd be able to brainstorm some interesting ideas there.
Okay, well then, thank you so much for
Thanks,
that talk. It was
Lauren.
extremely interesting.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
the questions.